Good morning, comrades. You are listening to Good Morning Comrade, WHIV-LP New Orleans. It's Saturday morning. Here we are. Jeff and Robert. We're in a little bit different of a setup than usual. We're in the pre-record studio in the station. This is like giving me like flashbacks to the old days, like the old little tiny room where we would used to record back in the beginning days with remember when Andy and Michelle were on the show too? Oh, man, that was cool. Anyway, we have a very special guest today. We have Mandie Landry joining us. Mandie is a sitting representative in the Louisiana Legislature, and she's currently running for the Louisiana Senate. Mandie, how you doing?
Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here on WHIV, as always.
Yeah, so first off, I mean, it's as of recording, it's 4 days until Election Day. Just check in. How you feeling?
For anyone who's run for office, those last few days and even those last few weeks, time is a mystery. What day are we on? What are we doing? The fires that come up every day, but we ran a really stellar campaign. I mean, I have a group of students and friends, and we have done everything we could. And I'm like at a peace right now. Mm-hmm. I know what we did, and now it's just bringing it home. And it's sort of like it feels right before like a hurricane's gonna hit. Kind of, you got your prep work done, and then
nothing you can do about it now.
I guess I'll open a bottle of wine or something.
They have a hurricane party, but for the election.
Yeah, I have all my stuff. I got my treats and my batteries and everything.
There you go. Well, yeah, and just so that the other person in this race, Lori Suplessis, if you are listening, please contact the station if you want to get on there as well, just to kind of hear all sides of this. Anyway, so just to kind of. This is the first time we've really kind of had a longer conversation, and I guess the first question I want to have is, what is your campaign about? Why are you running for Senate in the Louisiana? Why, to replace Karen, who served in its spot for so long?
Right. I mean, there's a short answer and a long answer, and the short answer is women's health issues and civil rights issues that have just blossomed and exploded this year. I've been a long time advocate for reproductive rights. I'm a lawyer. I've represented a clinic and minors, seeking judicial bypass. So when I ran the first time, it was on largely on a lot of women's health issues. And then the row happening this year and Karen resigning, and we have 5 female senators who are all like pretty violently anti-choice. I mean, it was no brainer. Like, I had to jump in and do this. But overall, I ran the first time, and I'm running now because I am a regular person. You and I know each other from, sort of around in union circles. And I think more regular people need to run. Yeah. And the reason we see such stagnation and nothing ever getting better is it's just kind of the same recycled format. And we were talking about our friend earlier. Like, I'm so proud of her. I want more people to try to do this. And we need more examples of that. Yeah,
and it is really kind of is kind of interesting too, because when you talk to somebody who's like, like when they're not like a regular person, when they're a politician, they speak in a very specific kind of like political way. And like, I guess I imagine, when you're in Baton Rouge or whatever in the legislature, you get a lot of that, and sort of navigating that is not particularly like. I don't know. I imagine it's interesting.
Yeah. There's certainly a lot of polished politicians, for sure, in good and bad ways. And
we had a legislature mostly.
Yeah. Well, I've talked about this before. I'm really fortunate that I represent a district in a city where I can talk about my views freely.
Yeah.
And most people, nod their head or agree with it. But there's a lot of parts of the state that there are people who are elected who maybe don't agree with the extremes who elected them. And so I can understand them being a little more conscious of their words, because like, do we really want... I know some of them are like, you don't understand, I vote for this, and Facebook won't leave me alone. And they call their office and they call their wife and all this. So I get sometimes the cautious thoughts, but you're right. It leaves people with this kind of bad taste of who am I actually talking to here?
Yeah. And just to kind of be a little bit clear on the district. So we're currently in a district that is But can you describe it, I guess? Because it's going to be changing as well. So what is it now and what is it going to be?
Right. It's changing a little. Certain people have been acting like it's changing a lot. It's not changing a ton. So the district right now, it roughly is Canal Street all the way uptown with some exceptions. It has a sort of little finger through a little bit of Tremé in the 7th Ward, and then Audubon is not in the district. It's 46% white, 44% black, 10% other, and 55% female, I think. How it will change, it will become exactly 50% African-American voters from 44. And it very interestingly will pick up part of Marrero. So for those of you who might not know, Marrero is a part of Jefferson Parish on the West Bank, right? It is nowhere close uptown, but on a map, it's right across the river from uptown. And I happen to be from there.
Yeah.
And my joke is the only thing really, or one of the few things Uptown Marrero have in common is me, basically. They're just not geographically close to each other. There's no continuity.
Not a bridge around there.
Well, it's not like Algiers is on the, on the west bank of the river, but it is right across the bridge. So it does change interestingly like that. And the racial demographics change a little. It will still be majority female. So it, there's a little bit of change coming to all of our districts, frankly, after redistricting. But this one will stay largely what it is now.
Yeah. So I guess when some very significant things have happened in the past 5 months, even specifically. I mean, last time I saw you, I think was at the protests on the day that the Dobbs decision was put forward, and Roe was essentially overturned federally, and it was essentially kicked down to states. What's sort of been and you mentioned, by the way, that they have 5 senators in the 5 female senators in Louisiana now, not including Karen, who stepped down, who are all anti-abortion. So, like, what is the sort of? I imagine it's not particularly friendly to the positions of pro-choice, pro-abortion for all people, and bodily health, basic health type stuff. But I guess what is sort of what are you looking at when you step up into that?
So I mean, this is sort of anecdotal to me, but I hear from a lot of different sources: constituents, colleagues, advocates. I'm in touch with people similar to my position around the country. And we've seen here, like we have seen other places, a pushback, people realizing like, oh no, like this actually happened. Wait a minute, we didn't think this was going to happen. Because, a lot of our really awful draconian laws here were written with Roe as a backstop, and people voted for them knowing that. What I have seen the big focus on has been on, in particular, pregnancy complications. And doctors are freaked out.
Yeah.
And they should be.
I imagine that they are.
Freaked out. Gynos and emergency room doctors in particular, because they're the ones who see someone who comes in who's pregnant with, complications that can go from minor to deadly, very quickly. And they don't want to be arrested. They don't want to lose their patient. They don't want to be sued. They're in this conundrum of like, what do I do if I only have minutes? And part of the reason is because this bill was not written by doctors or good lawyers. It's a poorly written bill. It has no medical insight whatsoever. It has terms in it that are not medical terms. And so the result is, leaving aside the women who might be 6 or 10 weeks pregnant who want to abort, it's people who are pregnant who need to end the pregnancy and they're unable to. And that is
got nothing to do with like even a person's like whether they want to be pregnant or not. This is like literally on the question of like direct cataclysmic health complications that would come from a pregnancy.
Yeah, and it's that's why it's so complicated, because people try to say elective or non-elective. I'm like, if you're about to bleed out and the doctor asks what you want to do, that's electing to save your life, and that gets into the larger conversation of judging someone's decision. to terminate, because I don't know if this person, what if someone's 8 weeks pregnant, comes in for an abortion, and she might have almost died on the table last time. There's just so much we don't know, which is why we shouldn't intrude as government officials into this decision.
Right, exactly. I mean, that seems like it. I don't know. Like, that's one of those
Seems
things,
easy, but somehow
it's one of those things where, like, again, the same kind of people that are like, oh, I'm being canceled, oh, free speech, oh, my right to privacy or my decisions or whatever. But, like, when it comes to these particular issues, they're just like, how do I meddle in this as much as possible from a official policy, either federal or state government standpoint?
Yeah, well, because it's not coming from a place of principle.
Right.
To me, they're coming from a place of control.
Rarely things are coming from places of principle, to be clear.
I try to be. It's coming from a place of control, and that, to me, that's what the far right is, and then the left, as it is more of a freedom, make your own decisions, kind of live your life, don't hurt other people, make your own decisions, especially on something as complicated and hard to predict as pregnancy.
Right. It's again, it's a very serious medical condition, and again, people. It's stated a lot in like mainstream media, I suppose, but the U.S. has like higher infant mortality rates than so many other countries.
It's shameful.
It's shocking and shameful.
The country has a much higher, maternal mortality and infant mortality and all those numbers. But our state has a much higher maternal mortality rate. And then among Black and brown women, it's like 4 times as high. And that's what people aren't understanding when they don't accept that this is healthcare. I'm like, but if people are facing life-threatening situations, or they know they might be, they need to have that choice. And we're going to lose more of them, and we're going to lose more Black and brown women and more poor women. Yeah. And because it's already happening.
Yeah. And I hate to like put it in these kinds of terms, but like more lives are actually saved from good health policy on these kinds of things, and the quote-unquote pro-life. We were mentioning this earlier before, the sort of like command that a lot of the sort of conservative folks have, the ability to dictate narratives and dynamics. Essentially, they're essentially framed as though they're pro-life, or they frame themselves as though they're pro-life, when you get these horrible death rates,
bad rates, and and what a lot of people don't see also is over half of abortions are decided upon by someone who already has children. And so are you going to make this person go through with a potentially fatal pregnancy, and then those children are orphaned and placed into poverty? And so, yes, it's a life issue, but it's also, what about the other kids and the other family members, and what that woman has to give to the world with her own children already, but you're making this decision arbitrarily.
And it's to kind of push it forward as well. Abortion is also a workers' issue as well. It's a labor issue. I mean, people have to. I mean, we have 9 weeks unpaid maternity leave. Essentially, is the baseline for this country, which is absolutely absurd. Even if all things do go to plan. So, I know that you're somebody who's been aligned with labor unions and workers for quite some time. Actually, funny story, one of the first times I ever saw you was at a Step Up event, and you're walking in there with like Andy and all these guys from the building trades. Was just like, that's kind of awesome, like this is somebody that I think is getting involved with the unions, which is something that a lot of politicians run from, a lot of elected officials run from in this place, which I don't really understand. But anyway, can you talk a little bit about how abortion specifically is a workers' issue and a labor issue?
Abortion and healthcare and parenthood. All of those things come. Yeah, I mean, they're all kind of combined. I mean, I guess I'm trying to put it more specifically. Paid medical leave and or childcare to me would be the most transforming, and they're this kind of similar, transformative labor issues
Yeah.
and gender issues. And I don't understand why business doesn't want to provide childcare, because from a purely financial standpoint, your workers can work more. And granted, you and I want it from a view of the child can be safe and in a healthy place, and mom doesn't, live in poverty. But from a business perspective, of course, you want your workers to come in. Well, they can't come in if no one can watch the baby. They can't come in if the baby's sick or if they're sick. And I mean, abortion is related to that in the sense that we talked about, if they have a troublesome pregnancy, but just parenthood in general, we don't have any protections or help for them. So of course it's a labor issue. It's a business issue. And it just seems like a lot of people out there are cutting off their nose to spite their face kind of thing. And we all lose.
Yeah. Do you ever feel that, I don't know, you mentioned that the abortion issue from from a, sort of a gendered perspective is something that's about control. Do you also feel, I guess, and maybe, you can, be honest about this, but do you feel like that's a similar kind of control-based issue if your workers are in this precarious position where they have to spend all this money for child care, where they don't have these benefits and they don't have, all these things that would make their life better? That means that they would be able to essentially control their workers more effectively. Not to be too cynical about it, but... Yeah,
but... they would still have a more stable worker base and people who are healthier and could be around longer and could provide more to whatever the business is. I mean, now you just have such a large population that is barely making it. We see in our city the problems with housing. That also blows my mind. I'm no one will be able to work here if they can't live here.
Yeah.
Y'all are killing me. We need housing or everyone's going to move, probably more to Jefferson Parish and other places.
Happening already.
It's
already happening.
They're going to move if they don't have any place to live. So you need, business community, you need to help us figure this out.
Or get out of the way.
Well, that's another thing.
You are listening to WHIV-LP New Orleans 102.3. This is Good Morning Comrade. Jeff and Robert in the studio. We also have a very special guest, Mandie Landry. Mandie is running for Louisiana State Senate. And what's the district again? I beg your pardon. District 5 to replace outgoing Karen Carter-Peterson. And we were just talking a little bit about abortion and labor issues, and I guess maybe talking about getting more into labor and worker issues. I guess I mentioned just a moment ago that you have been aligned with the labor unions, and I know that they have done a lot of canvassing for you in the past. Is that relationship still solid?
Yeah, I love those guys.
I love it.
I love those guys, and they keep me sane at the Capitol that there are people watching from a perspective of what's happening to poor people, what's happening to workers, how does this affect us? Because there's very few people elected or not at the Capitol who are viewing what's going on from that perspective. And I love those guys. My dad was in the plumbers union, and
that's where the teachers union holds all our meetings. That's where we hold all of our meetings.
Yeah, it was a big force growing up, and having them around is it's comfortable. It's familiar.
Yeah, and sort of what when you kind of have conversations and work out policy and whatnot with them, what kind of things are you kind of pushing for going forward? What's the sort of labor platform
talk with them about? Honestly, it's usually worker safety.
Yeah,
worker misclassification. For those of you who don't
I talk with Chip about that so much.
I know. So it's a business decision that. A lot of these, especially in construction, they want to hire people sort of off the books, not trained. But it really comes to a safety issue because then there's no one to report to. There's no one to take care of them. There's no. Sorry.
I didn't mean to interrupt, but when they also hire these people who don't have status, they also make sure these bosses, these companies or whatever, they hire these people who are. Who don't have status, they have them classified as contractors, as independent contractors. That's really important.
Right. So sorry, I know. I feel like whenever I talk about misclassification, I'm only talking to 5 people who know exactly about it. But you're right. They're misclassified. They might be employees, but they're labeled as independent contractors. So they don't have workers' comp. There's no insurance. There's no protections if they get hurt on the job.
Yeah.
But then they also, if something is unsafe, for example, the Hard Rock. There's no one to report it to. There's no one to come in. Chip and some of those guys said, if these were our guys, they would have walked in and immediately knew who to call about what issues. And then, of course, something goes wrong and the person is just left in poverty because there's no comp or the other money to help them out. And it's dangerous for everyone, as we saw with Hard Rock.
Yeah, or even like safety disputes or safety issues, and also pay disputes. If
for sure,
employer or I guess they end of a contract in this sort of situation, if it's a 1199 type situation, decides not to pay their point, what's this person who doesn't have status going to do? Go to the law?
Nothing.
Like they're going to risk their own, and while they do have the same, and this is important too, while people who don't have status have the same rights as other workers in this country, they are intimidated, and knowingly so, intimidated into not taking any kind of recourse for very understandable reasons, because they don't want to be sanctioned. They don't want to have their kids put into one of those, cages or whatever, or they don't want to be deported, and they don't want, they might be fleeing war zones. They might be fleeing
very real concerns.
Yeah, it's just I get really, really like amped up about this thing because it's just like one of the most predatory things that I've ever seen, and to the point, just the another extreme of that would be, I think there was a plant, we were talking about this on the show a little while ago, a Nissan plant in Mississippi, or is it Alabama, that was using like children as labor, like this year. It was wild.
People,
and these kids don't have status either.
It's scary what people get away with, and you hear a story like that, and how many more do we not know about? Because only some of it makes the news. A lot of it is just kept under wraps. And you're right. This is mistreating people who have, the lowest level of protections possible in society. And it's very purposeful to make a little bit of short-term money, and, hopefully your building won't fall down.
Yeah. And it's just, it's bad from the buildings are worse. What's happening to these people are just put against the wall, like on the floor with a boot on their head. It's just absolutely horrible. And unfortunately, these contractors come away with just barrels of money because of their sweet contracts with this. I'm sorry. I'm just like, no, I'm on it. I'm on my thing. Doing
I understand for sure. I understand the problem with that. Well, and another aspect of it, which I didn't realize till I carried a misclass bill, is how much money the state's missing out on. And that's why I can't understand we don't get more involved in it. I'm like, the state's missing out on tax money, on workers' comp, on unemployment. All this money that should be going into the state budget is missing. And that's hurting the rest of us. So basically you'll have employers who are doing the right thing, paying unemployment, paying everything they're supposed to. And then the people who don't are getting rewarded for it. It's really rewarding bad actors. You mentioned just now a work class misclassification bill. Can you talk a little bit about that? What was it about that to put forward, and sort of what was its fate? That was in 2020, I think, maybe 21. Well, the House Labor Committee is where all good things go to die. And, it's very That was like stacked. A nervous laugh from me. Yeah, it's very stacked. Everyone kind of knows it, but we tried anyway. And then one of the labor guys, he's like, "We didn't win, but you embarrassed the hell out of them." Good. And it was a bill to sort of tighten up who is a contractor, define and who it, is an employee, and to define it more, but also to put some teeth into it. So this might have changed a little bit last year. You caught me in a moment that I can't exactly remember, but I'm pretty sure under Louisiana law, there's either no or minimal consequences for this. Yeah. So what we had before was basically not even a slap on the wrist. No, well, if you were reported and they found that you were guilty of misclassification, which there are tons of guilty findings, they give them time to fix it or something along those lines. You better get this right. And we're like, no, at least put some teeth in it, at least give them fines. Now I'm remembering the bill had a decent fine on it. I don't remember the amount, but it was still significantly lower than the country's average and other states' average. And we said, we just need a fine on here to start this process. And there was just this boo-hooing and crying from lobby, like, they actually made the argument. Lobby said, essentially terrible. The statewide business industry or business lobby. But they don't have any facts usually in support of their arguments.
It's not about facts.
Right. But they actually made the argument in public that, well, what about the business owners who don't know they're breaking the law? Why should they get in trouble? And one of my colleagues said, I'm sorry, I've never heard that used in the criminal aspect when you say, oh, a person who breaks a law shouldn't be found guilty because they have ignorance of the law. And they just sat there just in their...
That's incredible.
In their protection and didn't say anything. It was pretty amazing. I mean, you can't claim ignorance of the law is not a defense.
No. And even in cases where it would make sense to...
Right.
Where it would make sense to, make sure that it's like a person might, be in violation of the law would
it could be mitigating, but it doesn't prevent you from
the violation. But essentially,
punishment.
but the fact that the business lobby is arguing that, hey, actually, I'm here to defend, I'm here to defend businesses owners. Yeah, no, I'm here to defend their ability to know nothing while running a business and have no consequences about it whatsoever. That's incredible.
It was, man. Now I need to go back and watch that tape because it was. It was so early in my term, and I was just speaking as me, and just unreal what was coming out of some of their mouths too.
It's wild. I've had some really interesting experiences at the Capitol going up there with my teachers, union people, and a lot of people don't realize who don't watch this sort of thing like Skooks does or whatever, but the Louisiana Legislature is essentially, you mentioned the Labor Committee, the House Labor Committee. The legislature just by itself is a very committee-based entity. If things basically either they're passed or they're killed in those committees when they get to the floor of the either this House or the Senate, they're gonna fly through no matter what they are. I've seen just almost like an auctioneer saying, we got this bill number, and just vote right through them really, really fast. It's kind of incredible.
Often, that does happen often, and it is very frustrating, and it was very frustrating to me as a brand new baby member, because some of us learned quickly that we couldn't necessarily count on what happened in committee. For example, often someone doesn't want to be the one no vote. And I'll do it sometimes and get these side eyes, why are you making us all vote on this? Well, when a bill comes out 12-0 because it was just sort of everyone agreed to it, then it comes to the rest of the chamber and they say, oh, well, no one had a problem with it. It must be a good bill. When really there were problems, but maybe sometimes I miss my committee meetings because I'm presenting a bill in another committee. Or sometimes you're I just can't do this 3 times in a row. They're going to just kill me. And so you realize, oh, shoot, I voted on these things or didn't vote on these things because there's no possible way to know all the bills. I think we had 1,500 bills filed in the House this last year. You don't end up voting on that.
You take them in a certain order.
But some never actually go to committee. You change your mind. Some don't make it out of committee. Sometimes I've had bills make it out of committee, and I'm like, you know what? That's far enough for this year. Yeah. But you just can't know everything, and so you rely on other people, but we're all kind of overworked, underpaid, and that's when you end up relying on industry. Everyone says lobbyists. I'm fine with the lobbyists. It's the industries that push a lot of this. Lobbyists to me are lawyers, basically. Yeah. I am. The good ones will tell you what's good and bad about their bill. But it's just certain industries have so much control there. Yeah.
And it's oil and gas. It's construction in the city, especially. It's really a lot of land developers as well.
It's funny you say land. So there's a lot of power there in areas that I didn't know before I was there. Commercial apartment companies.
Yeah. Oh my God.
My mortal enemies now. The apartment association, and they have several other organizations or whatever. It's these large landlords. There's no mom and pops behind them.
There's no such thing.
They own. Well, they're not involved in any of this. Yeah. It's these people who own thousands and tens of thousands of apartments, and they are the reason why we don't have any tenant protections in the state. And it's I'm going to die.
When you say no tenant protections, you mean like I can tell you get out of here and you have 2 weeks to move.
I mean, this is the biggest problem. You can put in a lease that someone can waive 30-day notice. Like the most basic thing. Like I was just blown away as a lawyer.
What is the point of the lease then?
There's nothing in it. And you have someone, and it's also, oh God, I forget from law school, adhesion contract, predatory contract, essentially where someone finally finds a place they can afford and they give them this lease, which they may not be able to understand all of it, not realizing
not everybody's a lawyer.
Not everyone's a lawyer, or it's complicated, not realizing that they've signed away the right to even have 30 days notice, or even if they realize it's in there, it's the only apartment they can find. But there's so many, it just blew me away because I lived in Washington, D.C. before this when I was in school, and there's robust tenant protections there. We had a whole clinic in law school, and just the lack of them in Louisiana is just pretty shocking.
Yeah. You're listening to WHIV LP New Orleans 102.3. This is Good Morning Comrade. We have Jeff and Robert in the studio with Mandie Landry. Mandie is running for the 5th Senate District seat in the Louisiana Legislature to replace Karen Carter Peterson, who resigned. So just to kind of like continue on that point in terms of those protections that you saw for tenants, could you just articulate a little bit about what they are, and just so that we can just so that we can essentially talk about like what this state could use essentially. Where would you start?
We are so far near the bottom in protections. There's so many ways to go. Here's one example of a bill that I had crushed this year, and it came from a constituent. His mother became disabled. She was elderly. She had a fall. She the kitchen caught on fire sort of thing. She could not live alone anymore, permanently disabled. The leasing company refused to let him out of the lease. He had to pay a bunch of money. And so we filed this bill and said, okay, well, if someone becomes permanently disabled, which is a legal determination, you're done. They should at least be able to give 60 days notice. I forget what we put, 60 days notice. And the committee and the apartment association just crushed it. And I was beyond myself. I said, you just voted against disabled people. Because they always say, oh, people are going to use an excuse. I'm like, no, this is something that a doctor has to say. They are permanently disabled. They cannot care for themselves. That's an example of they wouldn't agree.
That's how extreme the situation is right now.
That's how extreme it is that you can't get out of leases. And so much of the problem is it gets put on a credit report if you break a lease or evicted. And I'm not exactly sure all the things that will put you on a credit report, but it's a problem because then when you go to lease again, it's on there. And Louisiana Fair Housing has been trying to work with that a little bit. And I think they got something through the past year that Max will kill me. I can't remember exactly, but I think there's starting to be a little improvement. You can maybe get it taken off. But it's issues like that we don't even have those sort of protections. And look, there's always going to be bad tenants. There's always going to be bad landlords. We all know that. But just to have a little more of room for negotiation, even. I mean, we know also, luckily we have money for pro bono attorneys in New Orleans now. I had a bill on that also that we got through on committee with fair housing, because we know that if a tenant is being evicted, their likelihood of being evicted goes down by 50% if they just have a lawyer with them to help discuss things and just look at the lease. It's just
somebody that knows process. The law is helpful, actually.
Just basic process. Yeah. Well, because the tenant might not understand really what's in the lease.
Yeah, exactly. As far as you mentioned that you serve on some committees. Can you talk a little bit about what committees you do serve on and what kind of things you see going through them?
Yeah. So I've been on judiciary the last few years. That does a lot with courts, some alcohol and beverage. It's an interesting committee.
That's on judiciary?
Yeah. It's kind of a catch-all with the courts. And, but we have funny thing. Well, I shouldn't say funny. There's a bill Sharon Hewitt passed that came through that, excuse me if this sounds convoluted, because it is, any building in the state allegedly now that has received state money, you're required to sing the Star Spangled Banner or the national anthem, I forget, at the beginning of any event.
Oh, is that how we should have started the show?
And y'all are like looking at me, listeners, they're looking at me like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I know, it sounds insane. It's completely unenforceable. It's ridiculous. And that came to judiciary because it's like kind of this random legal thing. But we saw.
I love that somebody wrote that.
And passed. No, it's law now.
Oh. That's awesome.
It's law. I can't remember if it's the national anthem. I think it's the Star Spangled Banner.
Yeah.
How do you know? Is it $1 that went on the building? Who's enforcing the singing of it? What kind of events?
Yeah.
It's a whole bunch of
it's
craziness.
It's just like so somebody can go back and say,
they're patriotic.
I love America more than everybody else in this Louisiana legislature.
Yeah. I also was on civil law, and a lot of that was lawyer stuff, tort reform, but the civil law committee had the qualified immunity bill, Edmund Jordan, a couple years ago. So this was George Floyd time, very hot.
Police,
Right, and probably people listening understand qualified immunity gives law enforcement like complete immunity from almost any prosecution for anything. And his Edmund Jordan's bill, he's from Baton Rouge, who does a lot of police and civil rights work. He's an expert in this. His bill would have lowered that high standard and put into place instances of when you could bring a suit, and it was a long day affair and tons of testimony. And it was one of those days that two of my young Republican colleagues voted in favor of it. And it was one of the few times in the legislature that I could tell people's minds were turned, or they knew they were going to get kind of hit for it, and they knew it was the right thing to do. They're both under 40 years old, and I think that's why.
That's incredible. That's actually something that makes me have like a little tiny bit of hope in my heart, which is like, I always feel bad about that when I do that because I know it's going to get dashed and crushed at some point really soon.
But that's why, I mean, I did stuff with term limits. We can talk about that later. That even coming in, I said I have so much more hope for the younger ones, because younger legislators and electeds, because they're just so much closer to what's going on right now. And these two might have been, or they are Republicans, but to me, they're so much more in tune with what's going on in the ground, and with Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and everything going on, and just the technology of seeing all this now. Yeah.
And you mentioned also tort reform, which is I mean, people hear that and their eyes glaze over, but like it is actually extremely important. Like, they don't realize that when you click like, this is more federal, I suppose, but when you click like, yes, I agree on your terms of service on whatever thing, that's something that goes to, like, not like, if you have a dispute or a violation of those terms of service or whatever, you essentially the end user has no rights, and like the only way to adjudicate that is not through a court, but you're signing your right to a court away, and it's like a part like handled by an arbitrator that's appointed by whoever the other, whoever presented this to you, whatever corporation or whatever.
Yeah, that's a good example of the bad side of tort reform. I mean, it generally is. It's this catch-all term to quote reform civil law. We
got to get those trial lawyers. They got to
get the trial lawyers, it's trying to decrease the amount of lawsuits. They claim that lawsuits are clogging up the system and people are taking advantage. But the idea, as you mentioned, like the arbitration agreements, is that a lot of these pro-tort reform people or businesses don't want to face a civil lawsuit. They don't want to face a jury. They want to avoid it.
Yeah, they want to essentially steamroll all over anything that get in the way of business.
They either will never get you there, or will be so cost prohibitive that you won't do it. And it's harmful. It's most harmful to people who are poor or don't have money to hire a lawyer, which is most of us. I couldn't afford me as a lawyer.
I've always hoped to just never get into any real trouble, because I never want to have to like pay for a lawyer, because that's just something that's so incredibly expensive that you just kind of.
It is, and your plaintiff's lawyers, which is why they do.
And it's not the lawyer's fault, obviously. It's like that's a systemic problem,
right? And a lot of them do. That's why they do things on a. I hate to use the word commission, but they, if they get you a judgment, they get a percentage because up until then they're working for free.
Yeah.
And so they only get paid if they win the suit. And so the business side says, oh, they're all rich and making money. I'm like, well, they're rich if they're good at their jobs, which means that they're serving their clients.
Right. And that means to take money from people who are wronged, which is like,
Yeah.
I don't know, man. People do get wronged all the time. And if you want to take people's like ability to make things slightly less wrong, if not right, like in a, sort of a compensatory sense, then
if someone gets hurt and can't work and it's not their fault, if it's someone else's fault, then they should, be made whole if possible.
Yeah. Especially if, again, somebody is profiting off of the general situation, and it's just essentially a lot of like legal CYA, if you know what I mean.
Right. I hate those agreements. Oh, and I'll sometimes click them and just
you have to. What else are you gonna do? You just paid $200 for Adobe, whatever,
right.
and you're not gonna agree to the terms of service. You can't use the program.
You can't use it. Same with we were talking about the tenant protections. You don't agree to this lease, go find someplace else to live. That's not a contract. That's not a negotiation. That's just bullying.
Yeah, it's exactly right. So you said judiciary, civil law, any other committees that you're a part of? And how I'm sorry.
No. What's your question?
I was just going to ask, how do these committees get appointed, which I guess I would follow with that.
The Speaker of the House appoints everyone to committees. And after we were all elected, we put in request. And they try to honor your request. But they can't always. The money committees, appropriations, ways and means, commerce, people always want to get on those more than others. But so they try to fit people around. I actually was moved from civil law to ways and means last year.
Oh, money committee for a first term legislator, eh?
Well,
or second term.
First term, but they moved me in part because there was someone from Orleans who moved to another committee, and so they talked to me about it. They're like, we really think we need another New Orleans person on this committee. I'm like, I absolutely agree. And the Ways and Means Committee, first of all, is tax policy, which is coming up this year in the legislature, but also the capital outlay budget. This is boring, people, but capital outlay is money for roads and buildings and all your physical things in the state. So it's a pretty good committee to be on, because you can kind of encourage that the projects you need will get funded to be on that committee. And then next year, when there's tax policy, there'll be a lot more input from the committee.
Yeah. So this was not a fiscal session that just passed. The upcoming session is a fiscal session.
Upcoming is fiscal, which means lots of tax and fines and fees and anything having to do with money. And then we all just get 5 general bills. So anything you see on criminal law or healthcare or anything that is not specifically related to a fee, there won't be as many of those.
Okay. So I guess to sort of swing back to a little bit of what you're looking for in this campaign and what you're looking forward to kind of push for. Thanks for the civics lesson. Yeah,
I do feel like a civics teacher sometimes.
but I guess we mentioned abortion, we mentioned labor and workers. What other sort of things are you sort of hoping to achieve should you get put in the position of Senate?
So a few specific things. So one is to continue to get more money for New Orleans, specifically anything having to do with flooding, drainage, water issues. We were talking about capital outlay, so we all put our request in, and I probably had 10 requests in, and I just held on tight to a $9 million drainage project in Holly Grove. Just held on to it. That area does not get attention. It gets overlooked, and this project came from the city. And to me, right now with flooding and water issues, I'm like, this is the most important one on my list. Not that everything is not important that was requested, but
it's urgent.
But it's urgent, and it's particularly urgent to that neighborhood.
We're lucky we didn't get a huge storm this year.
We're so lucky. All of our money should go towards hazard mitigation. But it's also airline highway. It's a major highway in the city. And as a senator, you can get a lot more say sometimes in how that money gets distributed. And I would love to see more in the city for those areas that need a little more help with water. I mean, I tell people on the doors, they're like, what are you going to do about my streets? I said, I cannot fix a single pothole. However, if you were having a water issue or something major on like Claiborne or a state highway, I can help you out.
Yeah.
And so I definitely want to do more with that. And this year listeners will like this. So I got a bill through this year, the little bill that could, for employment protections for people with a medical marijuana prescription. And I say the little bill that could because I filed it with, Peter Robbins Brown of Louisiana Progress.
Love Peter. Peter's awesome.
We're thick as thieves. And we filed it just to it was going to House Labor, and we said, we're just going to start this process. They're never going to let it out. And what it is people with a medical marijuana prescription can still lose their job because they're going to test positive. So why do we have this program where the state makes all this money off this product that we are growing as a state, and then people lose their job? Well, it caught some wind with Republicans who are now all in on the weed train because there's lots of money.
There's a lot of money to make,
of course.
Yeah.
And it caught some wind, and what really helped us actually was the Department of Administration helped me with it because they said we can't find people, we can't find workers. Do you grab that?
I don't know what that beep is.
I have no idea.
It's the universe saying we need these protections now.
Yeah. Anyway, continue.
Yeah.
Little bill that could.
Well, the state said we're having problems finding employees because we have a lot of people who can't pass the initial drug test, and we think, or we know, a lot of them it's because of medical marijuana, and a lot of these are desk jobs and other jobs that have literally nothing, no remote safety measures. And so they caught on, and of course we have to exempt law enforcement and first responders, and I don't disagree with that at this point. But we got it. I mean, they helped me run that through, and we got it through. Nice. And it is the bill I probably get the most questions on because there are so many people with a medical marijuana prescription, and they are just dying for that protection. They're like, please, why doesn't it apply to me? And I said, we're working on it. We're working on it now. We have a commission set up to see testing for marijuana. And by the way, to people listening, I know cannabis is the preferred term, but our state law says medical marijuana. Sure. So I use the state term. But the testing for it is nowhere near what it is for alcohol. Like, you can't tell you how recently you ingested. And that's what we're trying to work on to see what other states are doing. How can we implement a policy that is fair and helpful to the patients? We have so many people who testified who said, I don't want to take opioids, but I have chronic pain. Yeah. Opioids make me lose my mind.
And also they're extremely addictive.
And they make me stoned. And guess what? Marijuana doesn't. So we're working, we have a really good group together of advocates, but also government agencies who want to see this expanded for next year. So definitely employment protections for our weed people.
I'm sure they appreciate it. You are listening to You're listening to WHIV LP New Orleans 102.3. This is Good Morning Comrade. We have Mandie Landry on the show. I did want to ask, so on this sort of cannabis question, we have medical marijuana, which is legal in the state now. I do weirdly feel like this is kind of a uniting issue that people could get behind in a lot of ways. I mean, you're seeing states that are, that would be viewed as, somewhere either conservative or somewhere on the line, that are making things legal statewide, not even just medical, but just for recreational use. And also I don't know. That seems like something that could be at least worth bringing up here, and it's good for. It's good for a number of reasons. Mostly because it's one thing. Whether or not this is one of the things that I sociology class in college. Jeff was just duh, this is obvious, but like whether or not this kind of thing is legal, people are going to do it. So if it's illegal, you're essentially just creating a black market for things like marijuana and other drugs, which I'm not even suggesting that we go there yet, or even potentially at any point, but like essentially making this kind of thing safer just sort of generally. And I know that there is sort of like another kind of pushback that essentially that is essentially like, oh, you're going to be putting essentially drug dealers out of business, which is true to a certain extent. And I think there's got to be a way to sort of like legitimize those operations as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're leaving so much money on the table because so many states have legalized recreational. We're leaving money on the table. We still continue to incarcerate, which is
we're number one. In Louisiana, we have a higher incarceration rate than anywhere in the world. We are number one.
It is, yes, and we'll get back to the weed point in a second. People in Louisiana are not inherently more dangerous than anyone else. It's not like we have something in our water.
We have more guns, I guess, than most states.
Well, we have a lot, but I joke about it. I'm like, is there something in the water that does this? But what we have is just a pretty deep incarceration system, and it's something I've been learning more about, and maybe we can discuss it another time. That
Angola is a modern plantation.
Yeah,
it's just, I'm sorry. I mean, like, it's just so
but there's
unbelievable that exists.
And I bet someone listening will send me information on it. But there's something, and I just started getting into it before the campaign, in how the early like slave patrols and early right after the Civil War, what were they called? When they just basically everyone who was a former slave that they started arresting and throwing in jail, quote jail. There was something unique about our system here, and I don't remember, that was like business oriented, right? That a few people owned, that made it so much more lucrative than other places to hold those people in bondage, and that's why one of the reasons historically we have way more people incarcerated, because it's a business that's been around for
a lot of money to be made.
So much money to be made
of the literally just locking people up industry,
just warehousing them, and we've started as a state on the criminal side to lessen marijuana penalties and not going anywhere near fast enough. But what I always think about is how complicated it is, because you might have someone incarcerated because eventually they committed an armed robbery, but they had 10 minor infractions before. So instead of getting 5 years, they got like 20 years or something. There's so many complications like that, or they got arrested.
Ruins people's lives.
Yeah, or they got arrested on a few minor charges and then could not find a job or could not find housing. And we need to fix that so bad. But from a state perspective, like, this is a place that people come to have fun and hang out, and why shouldn't we be making money off it? And way more Republicans are involved, which is probably why they want to control it a little more. But I think polling has shown that the state, if we had a ballot initiative, which we don't, but if this went on a ballot, like 65% of the state or something would approve it.
Put it on the state constitution.
We'd have to get it through committees first.
That's right.
Oh, don't get me started on all the steps we would have to take to get it on a ballot.
Louisiana is unique with the no ballot initiatives thing. It's kind of wild.
We need to fix it, and we need to have an amendment to the Constitution. Then that would have to be another amendment and go through all this. Yeah. But I'll throw out this point. One of those two young legislators who voted for the qualified immunity bill, Richard Nelson, he's a friend and has been looking at running for governor, which is very interesting. But he is pro marijuana legalization. He's young and smart, and qualified immunity. I guess he follows more in a libertarian bent, and it's this interesting
better than
thing
Jeff Landry.
I've been watching. Well, right, that there's a path there for someone who is like, yes, he's more conservative financially on everything, but he is looking to the future on these issues. Everyone wants cannabis to be legal. I mean, literally everyone does. It would fix so many holes in our budget.
And like in the like politician sense, like, you're supposed to be able to identify opportunity when you do that for a living, and like that's just like a dub. That's just like a that's a slam dunk.
They're always just weighing it. There's just a part of our state politics and population that anything having to do with any drug is bad, unless it's opioids or something.
Unless it's prescription,
but this is a prescription now. Well, it's considered
for
a
the
referral.
people who qualify.
It's considered a referral, but it's a prescription. Yeah.
Okay. I guess we're winding down to our last 5 or so minutes. I guess in the last couple days of the campaign, what are you feeling, and any kind of final words, and where can we find more information?
So my website is mandielandry.com, MandieLandry. I'm very active on social media, Twitter and Instagram.
She's a poster, folks.
I am. It's Vote Landry, Landry. I am not related to Jeff Landry. I am not a Landrew. I get those questions a lot.
Or Nancy Landry, right?
No, I'm not related to anyone would ever know. No one in my family's been elected. But I'm pretty easy to find, and a lot of your listeners probably know me a little bit. This is, election day and the day before, or high stress, but the fun time. If people want to come wave some signs or knock some doors and feel like you did your civic duty. It's great. I mean, I have a lot of students involved. They're the best. They're the best. I have so much hope for the generations following behind. But yeah, now I'm just at a sort of peaceful moment of the work was done, and we'll see if voters agree. And I'll just be knocking and making calls and just roaming around the next few days. But I'm always happy to talk to people. I love coming on radio and speaking to groups and that sort of thing. But yeah, it's nerve-wracking. But I mean, running and being in office has been the most transformative part of my life.
Cool.
For sure. And I think not just that people should think about running, but like working on campaigns too, because not everyone's going to come do this.
Yeah. Not everyone wants to put themselves out there publicly for the abuse that you will receive.
It's so hard. It's so hard. And you pay for it in many ways. But to just join the process, and it's helped me find candidates. We need to recruit. We need to recruit from union members. We need to recruit from people who are old liberal lions who are retired. I know a ton of them, and they are not backing down.
That's good. That's good.
Students, and we need to
retired
recruit.
teachers even. We need them for school board so bad.
Retired teachers would be great because we can't have current teachers because they need to work all day. But retired teachers would be wonderful. Just people from different walks of life. I've been trying to talk to doctors. We don't have a single doctor in the legislature. We have one nurse practitioner. It shows in our healthcare laws.
Well, we have a senator that's a doctor, and he's terrible. So, a U.S. senator.
Well, let's not even get into that. It's a whole other interview. But we need medical professionals. Our health and welfare committee chair, wonderful man. He was a teacher and coach, and that's great. But him and like myself, I am not a medical professional. I can't really determine what's going on in a lot of those bills, and so then you end up relying on witnesses. But it would be great if we had some doctors and nurses and therapists. Therapists would be great.
Yeah, that would be nice, because mental health. We didn't
Psychiatrists.
even get into mental health in this state, or just in this country. But it's dreadful, and that's one of those things that everybody talks about. Like, we need to do stuff about mental health all the time, and then when it actually comes to delivering on it, it's nothing. Well, anyway, thank you so much for joining us on the show, Mandie Landry. And like you said, vote Landry, and on Twitter, and I guess everywhere, huh?
Yep. And Tuesday, November 8th, your polls will be open from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. If you're not sure where to go, Louisiana has the Go Vote app or Go Vote website, GEAUX Vote, and you can figure out where to go. And you have to go in person, and you have to go to your polling place, not to City Hall. But it's real easy, and if you look at the app, it'll even give you everything that's on your ballot. If you put in your address. So no excuses. Go vote.
Go vote. All right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for listening. This has been Good Morning Comrade on WHIV LP New Orleans. We love you. Goodbye.